Pastor Makani was known to be the first person to arrive at the humble church each morning. He would unlock the heavy doors himself, then retreat to his small, windowless office to pray and prepare for the day's service. When the congregation began to fill the hall, he would emerge, delivering messages and visions that seemed to penetrate deep into the hearts of the people. The miracles that happened within his church were astonishing, prompting people to wonder about Pastor Makani's uncanny ability to know so much about his congregants, especially those who were attending for the first time. They dubbed the church the Gathering of Revelation because of the prophetic words and seemingly miraculous events that occurred there. Although it had been established in the city only a few months ago, the church quickly became a magnet for people from all walks of life. They came seeking hope, healing, and answers to life's mysteries. They came because Pastor Makani's power appeared to see through every shadow. As the service began, and the choir filled the room with stirring songs, the crowd waited in eager anticipation. When Pastor Makani finally stepped up to the pulpit, his presence filled the room with a calm intensity. He began speaking in a low, yet commanding voice, his words resonating throughout the hall. Suddenly, his gaze fell on a man sitting toward the back. "You, brother," he called out, pointing at the man in the fifth row. "Your name is Juma, born on the 15th of April 1979, is that correct?" Juma's eyes widened in astonishment. "Yes, that's right," he whispered, barely able to believe it. "And you have come here today, burdened by guilt, seeking peace for your troubled soul, haven't you?" Pastor Makani continued. Overwhelmed, Juma felt tears well up as he looked around, both in awe and relief, wondering how a man he had never met could know so much about him. The congregation buzzed, murmuring in amazement as Pastor Thando moved through the aisles, calling out names, birth dates, and revealing deeply personal details about those attending. Many were in awe, especially those visiting for the first time, who left with stories of a man who could seemingly peer into their souls. Word spread quickly, and the following Sunday, an even larger crowd gathered, hoping to witness or experience Pastor Thando's remarkable gift. Among them was a young woman named Amina, sitting nervously near the back. She had heard about Pastor Thando's abilities but had hesitated to attend. Her friend had insisted, urging her to seek guidance. As she sat there, tense and uneasy, hoping to go unnoticed, the service began. But Pastor Thando soon spotted her, making his way toward her. "Amina," he called out gently. Amina's heart raced. She hadn't shared her name with anyone. "You came here today after visiting a place you know you shouldn't have, the home of a wealthy man who gave you 100,000 shillings last night," he said calmly. Amina froze as the entire congregation turned their gaze upon her. "Yes, that's true," she whispered, barely able to process his words. "The money he gave you was meant as payment for something precious he has taken from you," Pastor Thando continued. "The notes he gave you are marked. They carry a curse. Among them is a bill with 3 small holes, a dark symbol representing your future and health." Amina's face went pale as Pastor Thando explained further, warning that the man's actions could bring grave harm to her, condemning her to suffering if the curse remained. "Bring the money to the altar," he instructed. With trembling hands, Amina reached into her purse, pulling out the bundle of shilling notes and slowly approaching the altar. As she laid the money down, she felt an overwhelming sense of fear and awe, realizing just how close she had come to a dark fate. Amina sifted through the bundle, and there it was, a single note with 3 small puncture marks, exactly as Pastor Thando had described. The congregation gasped, their eyes wide with amazement, as Amina stumbled toward the altar, holding out the marked bill. Pastor Thando took it from her and placed it on the altar, lifting his hands to the heavens in a powerful prayer. "It is well," he declared when the prayer concluded, his voice filled with certainty. "The curse has been broken." Amina returned to her seat, overwhelmed by a wave of relief. The congregation erupted in joy, convinced they had witnessed a true miracle. Word of Pastor Thando's power spread far and wide. Soon, people from distant villages and bustling cities began traveling for hours just to catch a glimpse of the pastor's mysterious gifts. Many spoke of him as if he were a man blessed from above. Each Sunday, the church was packed with eager faces, new visitors hoping to witness the extraordinary. Some came in hopes that he would reveal their own hidden struggles. Others simply wanted to be part of the phenomenon. The church grew rapidly. The choir expanded as young men and women, captivated by Pastor Thando's charisma, joined the ministry. Ushers and staff multiplied as more beautiful faces filled the sanctuary, each drawn by what they believed was a place of genuine holiness. But behind the scenes, the loyal church staff began noticing subtle, troubling signs. They witnessed endless miracles in the lives of strangers, yet none of them seemed to receive breakthroughs in their own lives. The young men and women waiting for love remained single, and those yearning for children continued to face disappointment. Still, they held on to hope, convinced their miracle would arrive in due time. One Sunday, during an electrifying service, Pastor Thando scanned the crowd and called out a woman. "Zainab," he said with a piercing gaze, "about your husband? He isn't here today, is he?" Pastor Thando asked, his gaze fixed on Lindaim, a woman who had quietly risen from her seat, tears streaming down her face. "No, Pastor," she replied softly. "Your husband threw you out of the house, told you he was done with the marriage. But instead of going back to him or leaving, you came here, didn't you?" Pastor Thando continued. "Tell me, am I wrong?" Lindai's voice trembled as she responded, "No, Pastor. You're right." Pastor Thando's tone softened as he spoke to her, but his words pierced the silence. "A woman has bound him with a spell. She has made him despise you, to turn away from you and devote himself to her alone. Right now, he's at the lakeside lodge with her." The congregation gasped as Lindai nodded, confirming the painful truth. Murmurs spread across the room, and people exchanged astonished glances. "Some of you," Pastor Thando instructed, turning to a few men in the congregation, "go to the lodge and bring him here." The men hurried out, and within an hour, they returned with Lindai's husband and the woman he was with, who both looked stunned. The congregation erupted into whispers of awe and condemnation, some shaking their heads while others watched in silence. "Be free of this spell," Pastor Thando declared, his voice echoing through the hall as he prayed over Lindai's husband. The man blinked, his face reflecting confusion, as if he had just awoken from a long, dark dream. As the spell was broken, the crowd burst into applause and cheers, celebrating yet another miraculous intervention.
Pastor Thando was known not only for his extraordinary ability to heal the sick and bring hope to the hopeless, but also for something else that drew people to his church: the gathering feast. On the last Friday of each month, the prayer vigil transformed into a night of celebration. 2 goats were prepared and made into nyama choma, which was served to everyone after the service. It became a monthly ritual that everyone looked forward to, both a spiritual and communal feast. People came for the miracles, but they also came for the sense of belonging, the food, and the fellowship. Pastor Thando's unique rituals and feasts enchanted his congregation, drawing people from all over the city. He believed that fellowship and communal bonding were vital to the church's growth, and he found ways to keep people engaged. Each gathering feast seemed to bring even more miracles than usual, and the congregation eagerly anticipated these nights all month long. Yet, beneath the miracles and goodwill, Pastor Thando's power came from a sinister source. Unknown to his followers, he had bound himself to a dark covenant with an underworld spirit. Although he appeared human to the people around him, his true form in the spirit realm revealed a different story. Half of his being was serpentine, marking him as an agent of darkness disguised as a man of light. This hidden demonic nature was concealed from the adoring congregation, who saw him only as a holy figure. Every morning he would arrive at the church early. While people thought he was praying and preparing his sermons, Pastor Thando was actually in a trance, summoning the spirits of each church member into his office, uncovering their secrets, fears, and weaknesses. He used these revelations, guided by the marine spirit, to perform his prophecies and miracles. This dark ritual fed both his power and the demands of his spirit masters, binding him more tightly to them with each soul he exploited. As long as he continued delivering impressive miracles, his followers remained loyal and blind to the true nature of his powers. People from all walks of life flocked to the church, inspired by the astounding miracles they witnessed. Newcomers and visitors left with stories of miraculous healings and revelations. However, the long-serving church staff, those who devoted their lives to the church, noticed an unsettling pattern. While others received blessings, their own lives grew increasingly difficult. Their friends and family began to question the irony, but each time they brought it up, the loyal staff dismissed it as a test of their faith. Little did they know, the miracles they marveled at came at a price, and that price grew higher with every soul Pastor Thando ensnared in his web. Pastor Thando explained that a powerful force from Musa's family line, one that had sworn to see him struggle, had turned Musa's employer against him. Pastor Thando prayed over Musa, assuring him that his boss would soon call to make things right. And just as Pastor Thando had said, Musa received the call, and his situation was miraculously resolved. The intensity of Pastor Thando's miracles only seemed to increase as more people arrived each Sunday, drawn by stories of his powers. Services were filled with displays that left the congregation awestruck. Yet, the church workers, those who devoted their lives to Pastor Thando and the church, grew increasingly isolated, turning away from friends and family as if they were under some unseen spell. The longer they served, the more drained and weary they appeared. Some even began to look ill, yet they continued to serve with unwavering loyalty. One Sunday, an elderly woman named Mama Kezia noticed something disturbing. She observed how Pastor Thando seemed to focus on the workers, speaking of their dedication as a test of faith, but each time he prayed over them, they appeared more depleted, as if he was somehow taking something from them. Her keen eyes recognized that these so-called blessings seemed to have the opposite effect on the workers, who grew weaker with each passing week. Mama Kezia's heart grew heavy with worry. Something was deeply wrong, and she felt an invisible weight pressing on her as she continued to watch Pastor Thando, wondering if his miracles truly came from the source he claimed, or if something far darker lay beneath his powerful displays. Pastor Thando addressed a young woman named Layla in the congregation. Your mother-in-law didn't want you to marry her son. She warned you to stay away, but you went ahead with the marriage despite her protests. Layla stood, her face etched with disbelief as the pastor continued. Because of this, she cursed you, swearing that you would never bear a child as long as she lived. The crowd held its breath as Pastor Thando looked at her intently. The curse is strong. She will need to pass from this world for you to be free to have children. Do you want to have your babies? He asked. Layla, caught in a web of emotions, nodded uncertainly. Do you mind if she dies? Because that is the only way to lift this curse, Pastor Thando added, his voice low. Layla's mind swirled, not knowing what to say, but the congregation's voice rose, chanting, Let her die! Let her die! Let her die! The air was thick with tension as Pastor Thando began to pray. The woman, her eyes clouded with desperation, finally spoke. Let her die, if that's the only way I can have my children. Her voice was trembling but resolute. Pastor Thando raised his hands high, holding a bottle of wine, a symbol he declared of blood, before beginning his prayer. The congregation watched in silence, the air thick with anticipation. When he finished praying, Pastor Thando brought his hands down and smashed the bottle against the altar, sending shards scattering across the floor. As the clock struck midnight on New Year's morning, Pastor Thando instructed the woman to call her husband, who had been visiting relatives in the village for the celebrations. The woman did as instructed, and moments later, she returned to Pastor Thando with the news. Her mother-in-law had just passed away. The church erupted into cheers and jubilant shouts. It was a victory they believed, a divine miracle. Yet something inside Layla stirred. As she watched the crowd celebrate, a deep unease crept into her heart. She had always believed that miracles came from God, but this was not how she had imagined them. The Bible says not to suffer a witch to live, she thought, but it never spoke of such a twisted way of fulfilling a prophecy. Layla went home that morning, restless and confused, her mind racing over what she had just witnessed. Deep inside, a question grew, was this truly the will of God? Days later, a heavily pregnant woman entered the church, her belly swollen with life, sitting near the front. Pastor Thando looked at her, his eyes scanning the woman before he smiled and called her forward. Come, woman, he said, his voice full of reverence. God has blessed you with a special child. The congregation fell silent, watching in awe as the woman made her way to the front. Pastor Thando had seen the glow around her, a crown of light above the fetus, a sign that the child was destined for greatness. As the woman stood before him, Pastor Thando reached out his hand and placed it gently over her belly. Though his words seemed like a prayer of blessing, his true intention was far darker. He sought to summon evil spirits, hoping to take away the child's divine glory, just as he had done with others in the past. But as his hand touched her stomach, a blinding light shot from the woman's belly, striking him in the eyes. He staggered back, eyes wide with shock and pain. The congregation gasped, their joy quickly turning to confusion. Pastor Thando cried out, unable to explain the force that had just overpowered him. Layla watched in stunned silence, her heart pounding. Something inside her knew that this was not the power of God. The light had revealed the truth. There were forces at work in the church that no one understood, and Pastor Thando's miracles were not what they appeared to be. As Pastor Thando staggered backward, clutching his face as if burned by some unseen force, the congregation fell into stunned silence. Confusion spread quickly, and many turned to the pregnant woman, assuming she had somehow harmed the prophet. But as the murmurs grew louder, Pastor Thando suddenly collapsed to his knees. "My eyes, my head!" he screamed, clutching his skull as if an invisible force were striking him. His body trembled uncontrollably as he stumbled forward, reaching out blindly, but no one dared touch him. The woman, standing frozen, watched with wide eyes, trembling but unharmed. The congregation tried to make sense of the scene, but Pastor Thando's screams grew louder. Desperately, he began to confess, his voice breaking. "I did it. I made pacts with spirits. I used your lives, your spirits, for my power." His words sent a ripple of terror through the crowd. Those who had once revered him as a holy man now stood frozen, their faces pale with shock and disbelief. The truth, dark and unthinkable, was laid bare. Pastor Thando had deceived them all, feeding off their faith and trust, using their spirits to fuel his supernatural powers. The workers, those who had devoted their lives to the church, were the first to feel the sting of betrayal. They had given everything to this man, believing him to be a prophet of light, only to discover he was a vessel of darkness. The feeling was like a nightmare unraveling before their eyes, and the weight of their disillusionment was almost unbearable. Pastor Thando's screams grew weaker, his body shaking as he staggered away from the pulpit. He collapsed onto the stage, his hands reaching out as he pleaded for mercy, but his cries fell on deaf ears. No one moved. The congregation, horrified and traumatized, watched as the man who had once led them now crumbled before them. One by one, they began to flee the church in panic, scrambling for the exits. Some ran barefoot, their shoes forgotten as they bolted into the night, desperate to escape the chaos. The church, once a place of awe and reverence, was now a scene of confusion and fear. As the last of the crowd spilled into the streets, Layla stood there, stunned and shaken, her mind still reeling from the truth that had just been exposed. The light that had once drawn her in now seemed to flicker and fade, replaced by a shadow that threatened to consume everything she had once believed in. Within hours, the once thriving church was abandoned. Pastor Thando, still pleading for mercy, slowly rose to his feet, his body aching as he stumbled out of the sanctuary he had built on fear and manipulation. His influence had crumbled, and the people who had once been his followers had finally broken free. The days that followed were silent. The church, now empty, stood as a grim reminder of the deceit that had taken place within its walls. Those who had once adored him began to speak out, their voices filled with anger and disbelief. News of his dark deeds spread quickly, and those who had once been blind to his manipulations now saw the truth clearly. One fateful evening, as Pastor Thando sat alone in his home, there was a sharp knock at the door. He opened it to find officers standing on his doorstep, armed with warrants and the evidence of his wrongdoing. Without hesitation, they took him away, charging him with manipulation, fraud, and using his congregation for personal gain. In the courtroom, witnesses testified against him, former followers who had suffered under his control. The trial was swift, and the verdict was harsh. Pastor Thando's downfall was as fast as it was unforgiving. He was sentenced, and as an inmate, he spent his days reflecting on his actions, the weight of his guilt pressing down on him with each passing moment. He cried out for mercy, but deep down he knew it was too late. His chance for redemption had passed. Meanwhile, his former followers, once loyal and devoted, prayed for forgiveness. They repented for their own blindness, realizing how they had been manipulated. One by one, they left the church, seeking new spiritual homes where they could rebuild their faith. They approached other congregations, careful in their observations, determined not to repeat the mistakes they had made under Pastor Thando's influence. The lessons they learned from their time with him stayed with them, guiding their search for a true place of worship and healing.